The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lakeside, and great crowds from Galilee followed him. From Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, Transjordania, and the region of Tyre and Sidon, great numbers who had heard of all he was doing came to him. And he asked his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, to keep him from being crushed. For he had cured so many that all who were afflicted in any way were crowding forward to touch him. And the unclean spirits, whenever they saw him, would fall down before him and shout, "You are the Son of God." But he warned them strongly not to make him known. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Despite the difficulties that Jesus went through in his mission, he continued to be focused on what the Father had sent him to do. To understand really much this text, I try to go back to this very Gospel of Mark, because we are just in chapter 3, so it's easy to go back and see the journey from the time of the baptism of Jesus. Like Father Anish was saying last week, it has been a healing ministry. And he started with the deliverance of the boy who had a demoniac. And the demons coming out and saying, "We know who you are the Holy One of Israel." And it could be that the demons coming out were, like even today in the Gospel, could be because they really worship him and they acknowledge the power and the strength in him. But also, it could be, and this is possible, that the demons were trying to overcome the power of Jesus, because to be able to overcome the power of another spirit, you must be able to identify what the spirit is. And that is why many priests who are doing exorcism, they will tell you, during exorcism, you have to call that demon by name. You have to force and pray that the demon would be able to identify itself. So once it identifies itself, then it's easy to cast out that demon, calling it by name. And this is possibly, I'm not saying that is exact, but possibly the reason why the demons try to say, "Jesus, we know who you are," to tell him, we know who you are, so we can be able to fight you. We have been able to overcome you. And so this is the journey of Jesus. Is being opposed by the demons. And then we have the healing of the paralytic in Mark's Gospel chapter 2. And the Pharisees, they begin to say he's blaspheming. And then he goes to the house of the house of Levi after his call. And then they start to criticize him and they say he is dining with sinners and tax collectors. And then there is the issue of fasting, where they say the disciples of the Pharisees and the disciples of John are fasting, but your disciples are not fasting. And then the disciples go out into the cornfields, to the wheat fields, and they begin to eat heads of wheat. And then they say, "You are doing something. Why are you allowing something to be done like this on a Sabbath?" And then later on, he now heals the demoniac, like we read yesterday, the child who was suffering, the man with the withered hand, and restored his hand, and on the Sabbath. And there was this great opposition, but also a threat to kill him. So we have, on the one hand, the great opposition from the opposition leaders, the scribes, the Pharisees, and those who had kept the law to the latter. This is on the one hand. And Jesus knows that at that moment his life is threatened. But also, on the other hand, we have people who have experienced the goodness of the Lord through the healing ministry. Those who, like the paralyzed, I even forgot to talk about the man who had suffered, the leprous person who was healed in Mark's Gospel, chapter 1. And the paralyzed, think about the boy who was having a demon, and then this man with a withered hand. They spread the news, people know about it, and they are flogging towards Jesus, and they are pushing on him. They want him to touch them and everything. So, on the one hand, Jesus could easily say, no, you go away. I want some of my peace, because I know the Pharisees and the scribes are threatening my life. I better follow their way, and then there will be peace. But then Jesus was focused on his mission. He knew his life was threatened, but he also saw the people for whom he had come into this world, the poor, the suffering, those who are going through difficulties. He saw them, he looked at them in the eyes, and he had pity on them. And he didn't care what the opposition would say, but he stood focused on his mission. And this is a great call for us. And one of the persons who had experienced such a thing would try to think about it, would be Archbishop Oscar Romero, who on the one hand, he received a lot of threats from his own government, was being threatened, he was even killed at the end. But also, he could as well say, no, I don't want anything, I want to lay low, and I will have no trouble with the government. But he also looked at the call in the eyes of the poor people, those who were persecuted, and he stood his ground. He kept his eyes focused on his mission. Now, this is not about great people who tried to stand on their feet, especially in the midst of persecution. It's about us also. We have been called to mission in one way or another. Maybe people who have families know of the persecution and the difficulties that are in family life. And at times the temptation is to break the vows. The temptation is to get away. The temptation is to lose the sense of responsibility for the family. But this is a call to remain focused on what Christ has called us, the path that Christ has called us to follow. And for us also, like students here in the seminary, we know there are moments that we feel, no, the difficulties are too much. The challenge of following the program is too much. The studies have become a challenge. The relationship you have with your brothers in the house will be difficult, and you say, no, I better keep off this thing and live a peaceful life. But again, Jesus had to grow through the cross. And he said in his word, in Luke's Gospel, chapter 9, verse 23, if you have to be a follower of mine, then you must pass through that path of the cross. You must be able to experience that difficulty, the persecutions, but then be able to overcome. He talks about perseverance, those who endure to the end. He does not say those who live holy lives, but those who live this holy life and endure. Endurance, perseverance is what we need. And once we persevere and once we endure, we must have our eyes focused on the mission to which we have been called. The mission to love, the mission to love God and neighbor, the mission to have good relationship with our brothers and sisters, the mission to be able to stand for justice, for peace, and to love the people around us, and to do that which God wants us to do. Let us therefore ask God in this Eucharistic celebration that He may grant us the grace to remain focused on the mission to which He has called us, and that in the midst and in the face of persecutions, we will be able to persevere.